Okay, we're on. We will let people join a little bit earlier. I'll do on my usual thing, Andy, and I'll make sure I've dropped a comment to let people know that they should say hi as they join us.
Okay.
That just means we get to get a bit of a feel for who's coming along. I think I haven't even had time to send that yet, and we've already got Claire saying hi. Hi, Claire.
Oh, Claire, you can always count on Claire. Hi, Claire.
So yeah, I think we'll have a few Hearts of Ace people joining us to support you. Yeah, we've got.
Oh, Willie said to say hi. He's going to be a little bit late.
Wonderful. Yeah, we've got Donna.
Hi, Donna.
Hi. Debbie saying hi. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Deb.
Good to see people join. We went over time a little bit because we were happily discussing everything beforehand as well. So
it's only 6:01 on my phone. It's 6:01 on my phone.
Oh, that's all right. No, I've got the StreamYard counts down the seconds.
Right, okay.
But no, I think Facebook doesn't allow you to start more than 5 minutes late or something. They have.
Right, okay.
Things. Also, we've got Leslie saying hi as well. We've got Michelle coming to join us. Lovely to see people coming in.
Thank you.
I think I might get things started because with the lives, we always get people kind of flitting in and out. But before we properly get into things, I want to acknowledge we're going to be talking through Andi's story, Andi's experiences, and particularly their experiences linked to trauma and ACEs. So because of that, especially for people who might have had similar experiences, this might be triggering in some way. We're going to be very conscious to, avoid unnecessary details, etc. But if that does happen for whatever reason, I want to make it very clear that's not your fault. That's a very normal reaction. And I also wanted to make it clear that there's a couple of things that you can do to look after yourself. So I'll just share my screen for a second there. So first of all, there's 3 simple things that are usually enough. But I will highlight that another wonderful charity that supports adult survivors as well on the right there if you want the contact details. But some of the things you can do is just ground yourself, come back to the present moment. So take some deep breaths in and out, maybe notice things in your surroundings. The second thing, if that isn't enough, is just removing yourself. So that might be, go get yourself a glass of water, walk around a little bit, take yourself out of it until you're feeling better. And the final one is please do reach out. You've got my email address below there, idawson@wavetrust.org. You can also reach out to our wonderful peer support group, Hearts of Ace. I know there's lots of fantastic people in the comments there from that. And you can you can contact Anthula Kutsudi from the Wave Trust team, as she is the main reference point for the Hearts of Ace as well. And I'm seeing some more wonderful people joining us in the comments as well. We've got, I think, Gillian, we've got William.
Hi.
Lots of wonderful people joining us.
Oh, my wonderful people.
So yeah, I think should we kick things off with just some little introductions there. I'll start off because I probably don't have much to say. Most people who will have on today will have seen me before, but some of you might not have, or some of you might be watching this on Watchback. So I'm Isabel. I am the project manager for police and criminal justice for the charity Wave Trust, which launched the 70/30 campaign, and I'm also currently involved with most of the social media work around that. So, for example, I have been running the live streams, and I am joined by the absolutely wonderful Andi today, who is going to be telling us a little bit more about her story. Andi, do you want to say hi to kick things off before I get into any questions?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for joining. I appreciate the support. It's a bit nerve-wracking.
It's all right, that's all right. And I will say both for you, Andi, and for anyone who might want to join on future lives, even if you are feeling nervous, my main job here is to look after you rather than do anything else. So
I know you will.
always let me know if we need to move anything around to make that easier. So yeah, I think the thing that might be most useful, Andi, is if you can give us a little bit of insight into why you wanted to share your story today, why you thought that was important.
Yeah, I think it's really important to me to raise awareness of a generational trauma that's handed down that we need to stop for the children, basically. You can see, if I drive around the council estates in my area, you can see the children have been still sitting outside drinking and everything, and it's kind of, that's just the way of life that they understand, and nothing else. So I need to reach out to those people, and we need to support them, and stop it from snowballing through generations. I also am a huge advocate for the Susan Lamplugh Trust and everything that they do to deal with harassment and stalking and trying to stop domestic violence things. That's really close to my heart. But it's not until I kind of started talking to you that I've realised that my trauma dates back to early childhood, and it's been trauma after trauma after trauma, really. So it's about stopping the cycle and the things we can do to stop that cycle, getting the story out there, getting into schools, helping the children so they don't turn to self-medicating, prescription drugs. Like I said, I was put on antidepressants at 13 and a pill by my mum because I was uncontrollable. You know, we need to stop that, find out what's the root of the problem and work through it. And we need to start listening to our children.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge, huge issue that, you know, we're busy, we're tired, everybody's been low for a couple of years because of COVID and things like that. And it's really important to ask your children how they're doing, how the day was, and things like that. So we need to interact with our children more, basically.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we were just talking before we went on the live really about how important that emotional support can be for children and how much of a difference that can make. But also how it's maybe not as obvious as other challenges that people might go through. I know, Andi, that you were talking about obviously traumas occurring for you, even though you weren't necessarily in the most deprived area, and being able to see that kind of comparison with other families and not immediately therefore clocking on to some of the things that were happening to yourself. Would you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I spent many years, I thought my traumas didn't start until I was a teenager, but looking back, it started in the family home when I was much younger. My dad was a police officer. My mum has never had any interest in me. I had an older sister, she's passed away now, who was wonderful. And then my mum had a baby boy, Malcolm, but he only lived 10 months because she had a rubella injection when she was pregnant and wasn't meant to have any more. And I've learned along the way with therapists and what have you that when she found out she was pregnant with me, she's either going to wrap me in cotton wool or hold me at arm's length because she's had the loss that she's had. So I've never been told that. She's never told me that she loves me. One of the things that really, really hurts is that when my dad used to hit me and give me a good slapping because he'd locked somebody up that day who decided to tell them that they'd slept with me or something just to wind him up. He'd believe them and come home and I'd be the one that'd get it, and my mum would just stand there and watch him and allow it, and I would be begging for her to stop. And still to this day, I mean, I've got a stream of texts. I always send flowers on her birthday and Christmas and everything. I don't get so much as a birthday card back off her. Which might be quite shocking to some of my friends that might see this. But I've got nothing to hide anymore. As you know, she made it quite clear last week that I was disowned from the family. She doesn't bother with me or my two younger children. And it's awful. It really is awful. All I ever wanted was my mum. I want to do those things I see other people doing with their mum, going for afternoon teas and things like that. but we've never had that that attachment.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, I was brought up as a boy, taken to the rugby with my dad and the pub and to play pool and things like that. And those days were great, absolutely great. When me and my dad got on, we were fantastic. Yeah, but it was basically I was brought up to be the boy that she'd lost.
Yeah. And I
which
think
is hard for her as well, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that's what I wanted to touch on, Andi, because I think you said it at the very beginning that what we want to do is really break those intergenerational cycles. And I think the trauma for your mother is that much more obvious in the story you told, but a lot of the work that I'm doing within the police lets me know that there's probably a lot that your father went through as well that might have been behind the scenes or at jobs. You know, some of the data we see for police is incredible, but just the amount of trauma they're exposed to on a daily basis, you know, vicarious trauma is a huge issue. So I can imagine that would also play into very different.
We sat down in the pub and had a good talk about what happened when I was a teenager, that we'll come on to, and he accepts that he should never have shown me the door at age 14, and I accept that I should never have met a heroin dealer and thought it'd be clever to make friends with him because my dad was CID and wanted me to be a policewoman, and I didn't want to be one, so that was my way of sticking two fingers up. And my God, I've paid the price.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, as you said, some very complicated dynamics that can happen within a family when there's all of those different things going on. I'm trying to decide what's the best step forward there in terms of questions. I don't think, unfortunately, you've been through so much that it's hard to prioritize what to touch on, but which questions are most relevant in terms of what to do. I think it would be very useful to give people a little bit of background for all the activisms that you've done around domestic abuse and stalking, etc., and obviously maybe some context as to why that's so important for you.
Okay, so one of the traumas I had was being held against my will by the heroin dealer I mentioned before. Held against my will for 8 months in one room. This will shock a lot of friends as well, because a lot of them, when he took me out with him, would never have known what was going on behind closed doors until it got to the point that everybody could see it. But yeah, so I was put in a room, no toilet, nothing, beaten, raped, sold to other men. I'd already started, as I said before, with drugs around 13 to cope. I think I was 13 when I first started smoking cannabis, and then went straight from that and went on to acid, and can actually remember me and my friends saying, we'll smoke cannabis, but we won't do anything harder than that, and how the cycle went on. So after the attempted murder, I ended up on the front page of all the national newspapers, and ended up on This Morning with Richard and Judy. And the Susie Lamplugh Trust got in touch with me. In fact, they fitted a lot of alarms and everything. They do a lot of work. If anybody needs or would like a personal alarm to carry, get in touch with me, and I can get as many of them as you need. I'm rambling. So basically, Susie Lamplugh Trust got in touch with me because we've had a harassment act for quite a long time, and it wasn't reviewed until I helped review it in '96 to include stalking. So basically, I went through the trauma of being held against my will. He went to jail for attempted murder for 4 years, but when he came out, the experience I had after that was much more harrowing for the next few years than the actual incident itself. I couldn't go out without him following me. He's kidnapped my daughter. He's driven his car into the front of my house. I had to have sledgehammer-proof plastic put on any glass in the house because they were sick of replacing the glass. Just the strangest of activities ever, but he was always somewhere, and I've spent so much of my life looking over my shoulder. He's assaulted my brother-in-law. He tried to assault my sister. He's given my family a lot. So to work with Jack Straw and Diana Lamplugh, to have stalking, I did, because at the time all the police could do, if he was in my garden watching through the window, or what have you, the police would come, and the only power they would have then was to move him on. He'd move on, walk around the block, and come back again, and they didn't have any more powers than that. And there's so many women and men out there that suffer stalking, and it's something that still needs to be put out there. There's a lot of police officers that still don't understand the powers they have for stalking. It's not someone just following you around. This is like somebody coming in your house when you're not in and moving things, just to try and make you feel like you're going crazy. Just going through my things and really weird to be in my own home. At the time, I had a young baby as well, so that was hard. I've been through a lot of women's refuges and safe houses. Yeah. So the work with Susie Lamplugh and Jack Straw, obviously it got passed, but we really need to raise the awareness and let people know that option is there for them. They are entitled to have something done. Keep a diary of everything that happens. Keep a diary of every phone call, a dodgy phone call you might get. Anything at all, as small as it is, record it, keep it, and then if you don't want to approach the police, approach victim support. They're a great team as well, and can help you if you get through talking to the police and things like that.
That's some wonderful advice there, Andi. And I think what you're saying about the importance of awareness, and if I think of what is shown in stalking in media, etc., it's always that kind of following people around, or just that slight unsettling, rather than the kind of full range of hell that you were unfortunately put through. And I think that really shows the way that how dangerous it is physically, how dangerous it is psychologically, how dangerous it is for the other people around you in your life, etc. I think I might actually just highlight the comment from Claire here, because I think that says it the most on you being an absolute warrior to be here now to go through all of that. But I'm highlighting hers just because I think she phrased it well, but I will say that there are many, many other comments of support coming through.
Thank you.
And I think definitely that advice will hopefully help people, do reach out. There are things that you can do. And I think that advice of what might make it easier and keeping a diary, etc., is a brilliant practical advice for people who might be going through similar situations.
I suppose it's important to say as well, by that time I did have drug and alcohol issues. When I was held against my will, although I already took what I would deem party drugs, cocaine, ecstasy. It was in the rave era, that kind of stuff. The first drug he ever gave me was crack and heroin together. And I was given an addiction that wasn't my choice. But I've phrased that wrong. Nobody chooses the addiction. And behind every person who does have an addiction, please look just a little bit closer at those eyes, because behind those eyes, everyone has got a huge story to tell and a trauma. And it's about listening to these people. Take 5 minutes to talk to the homeless person down the street, because they are they are the strongest people, because they've had to be. Be nice.
Absolutely. I did actually choose that as the image for today's live stream, which was just be kind always. And I think that's the real message here. And what you were saying there about the choosing to be an addict, I think the distinction that you were getting at is the difference between someone maybe making that choice the first time they try for self-medication, of finding coping mechanisms, etc., rather than that being done to you. And obviously that's not the same as choosing to be an addict and choosing all the terrible consequences, but it might be the only coping mechanisms that are available to deal with.
Absolutely, because I was self-medicating then anyway. But like I say, nothing like along the lines of heroin or anything like that. But that was to keep me quiet. And he had his mum in the next room as well, doing the same to her. So I could hear him beating her, and then obviously she could hear what was going on with me. Every room in the house had a lock on the door. He had complete control of everything. And this is dating back to when I was between 16 and 18. I've lost where I was going with that. So it's a lot of years ago that it happened. And the main ringleader of the people that were doing this to me, he died, it was last summer or the summer before. And the feeling from that, I was hysterical, I was happy, I was crying, I was shaking. But I've realised now that whether he's dead or alive, it doesn't take away the trauma. You know, it's still there.
Yeah.
And it always will be.
And I think that's quite important to recognise. So we always talk about how it's never too late to build resilience and it's never too late to start healing. And I think you've done a lot of that to be able to be standing here today talking to us about this and what you're going through. But that is different to say that there's suddenly no impact and it's magically fixed. What it means is that you find the strength to keep going and deal with things, etc. And I know there's all kinds of things that can come up here. So see what's the best direction to go with this question for you. But
I think, it's a trauma that always stays with me. And I went to psychology for a couple of years after it happened. And for a long time, my story of back then is now like something I watched on EastEnders. I've managed to detach from that quite a lot. But I've had to live with that man only serving 22 months when I died 4 times during that attack. That I've had to live in the same town with him until he died. So I'm 47 now. And that happened when I was a teenager. So I've spent pretty much my whole life either moving around or looking over my shoulder constantly and having to do the same for my kids. So we never, would see what my children looked like or anything that, could potentially bring harm to us.
Yeah, I think that's possibly one of the worst parts for me, because we know how big an impact that hypervigilance has on people and that ongoing toxic stress. And I know that you were able to find other buffers later on in life, etc., that helped in different ways. But having that constant stress response for so long, and truly for years and years and years, decades, I know has had an impact. I think that's one of the things that might be important to know, because we're going through it at the moment as we do our ACEs series with Hearts of Ace as well, on the fact that trauma impacts your mental health, it impacts your physical health, it impacts behaviors like addiction, for example, the relationships you choose, your ability to hold down a job, your ability to stay in school, etc., etc. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the impacts that this has all had in your life beyond what you've said so far.
Oh, a massive input. Oh God, where to start? Oh, give me a hint. What did you say at the beginning? Sorry.
Mental health, physical health.
Yeah, right, okay, so my mental health, CP, TSD. That's right, isn't it? Yeah.
Complex.
Um,
Yeah.
complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That's just due to the amount of the C is just because it's been many traumas since then as well. Anxiety, like you say, hypervigilance. I'm diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia. I've got arthritis from multiple unfixed broken bones. I've got a brain injury. So I'm really bad at memory, things like that. Um, it's it's definitely had a huge impact on relationships that I've chosen since then. And they've all been violent, except Andrew, who I've been with for 2 years. He's the first partner I've had since my first love when I was 13. Not to be violent towards me. But I think that stems from growing up thinking that was normal.
Yeah.
Mum had to, mum would have meat and two veg for dad on the table. And I can remember when I met my late husband, him saying, "Can I have egg and chips tonight?" Just such a simple thing. But I'm like, I can remember staying up all night and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning just to make it so that maybe I won't get a beating in the morning because it'll be nice. And that carries on then, like I say, through to when we first got married, and he was like, "I just want egg and chips. I don't need this meat and two veg every day." And it's a tiny thing. It's what you have for your tea, but it was so strict in our household that this is, that's how I thought I had to do it. And same with, the first time he hit me, I thought to myself, yeah, that's fine. Nothing compared to what happened to me with the person before that. And nothing compared to my dad's violence. So I think, I can cope with this. So it's definitely had, I was married for 22 years before he died. He drowned, so that's another huge trauma. Took the dog for a walk and never came home. But he had a lot of mental health problems, bipolar, drug problems, and very violent in drink. So I would used to do bizarre things like buy speed, because I knew if I bought speed or something, he would sit and talk to me all night and there'd be no violence because he'd be like really happy and chatty and things like that. And I think back now to the things that I've done to try and keep the peace. And it's that constant release of adrenaline that I think I've been living off for probably 30 odd years, if not longer. And that is attributed to all my health issues now. My issues with learning to just have conversations with people. And my partner, being Scottish, can talk to anybody about anything and can just strike up a conversation really relaxed. And I'd love to be like that, but I've got this. I said to a friend the other day, when I used to see her at school, I thought, I've always thought people hate me and don't like me anyway from a young age. And I said to her, when I used to see you at school, I said, I was really selfish because I would just talk about me, me, me. I said, and it wasn't like that. It was almost as though I thought I had it stamped here and everybody could see what had happened to me and how much I'd failed. So I thought, if I get it all out to you and tell you exactly what's going on in my life, then I'll get in there first and you won't judge me. And so it wasn't a selfish you know, not letting the other person speak, but it was almost like I couldn't get it out quick enough. I need to tell you my whole life story right now because I know that you're going to judge me for it behind my back. So I'm going to tell you the truth. So that, you know, that got to me. I mean, she said, I've always thought we were really equal. So obviously it's something that I've developed where I think that people don't want to listen to me. People don't like me. I've got a really bad accent. I sound awful.
Not at all, but I think that's a really good example. I don't know if that's the right word. Clear example probably is better of how trauma impacts the view of yourself and the view of the world. And that not feeling safe automatically when you're talking about relationships with others, but that thing of no one wants to listen to me or I'm doing things in this way. Whereas for others, it doesn't come across that way and they're not thinking about that. And that's not the lens through which they're seeing the world. But because you've had to adapt yourself so much, pay attention so much and be on high alert so much, or have had signals from people who didn't want to listen to you or didn't care in different ways, that then spreads. And I think that's one of the main ways in which trauma impacts people, is really altering their view of the world in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, I already felt worthless from my childhood. And, you know, like I said, desperately, like last week, I texted my mum because my sister's passed away, my brother's passed away, my dad was killed at 52. I've lost my own son. So yeah, dad, sister, brother, son and husband. So basically me and my mum are the only living adults in the family now. And I would have thought she'd want something to do with me and the kids, and we could be close now. And basically she's gone as far as removing me from the will and making my eldest daughter executor. Eldest daughter who's got very uncontrolled bipolar and can't hold her attention, adult ADHD, and BPD. Obviously, a lot of that is attributed to she's the eldest, so she can remember a lot of things that, in fact, she remembered things that I'd totally forgotten. So it's funny what I block, but my child has taken on board. She can remember being out in a pram and him throwing a milk bottle and it smashing at the foot of the pram, but she remembers that. I had no recollection until she told me.
And that memory is very strongly impacted by trauma, and that can be both in terms of blocking it after the fact, but sometimes your body might dissociate so much that you're trying not to encode it happening consciously in the first place. So your body will obviously store that. It will store the stress response, it will store that, but the conscious memory might not be stored in the way you expect. It'll come up with particular triggers, places, smells, whatever it might be. Triggers can be
absolutely,
but memory is very, very strongly impacted. So I'm not surprised that it was impacted in different ways across different people. And I'm also not completely shocked by what you were saying about all the bereavement within your family in terms of the different reactions to it. I think your reaction of really wanting that closeness with who's left is a very, very natural thing. But from what you'd said about how strongly your mother had been impacted by the bereavement of your brother in your childhood, I'm not completely shocked by the fact that has caused even more withdrawal in such a stark way.
Absolutely. I understand her. I mean, I've worked in mental health due to what I went through. And I can see that, but she just, I think that's a generational thing as well. Stiff upper lip and get on with it. And we weren't allowed to mention his name. I don't know where he's buried or anything like that. It's just he's gone and he's never spoken about again. But kind of moving forward and then talking about my husband who was bipolar, BPD, and of anxiety and depression. He'd had an awful childhood. His mum put him into care and chose a man who threw her down the stairs and put a shotgun in my husband's mouth, and put him into care. So he hadn't had a nice upbringing. So he had his drug addictions. His mum was an alcoholic as well. And throughout the marriage, he would go walkabout and he'd go disappearing for days at a time. And then he'd phone me and say, "Can I come home now?" And it'd been obvious that he'd been on a bender, and he'd come home stinking. And I think it's the empath in me that could never not help him. The amount of times that I've had police searches out and he's trying to kill himself. So I'm dealing with my own mental health, and then I became a complete control freak. I was trying to second guess what he was doing before he did it, to do things like I said, feed him, say, shall we have a night on well, it obviously speed was a long time ago. By then it was coke and crack and everything. I tried to control everything to protect the children, but no matter what, the children pick up on these things. The stories of daddy's not well and he's gone to hospital can only last so long. There's quite a huge age gap in my children. So my eldest has suffered from the first trauma, the attempted murder, and then with her dad has seen a lot of violence and things like that. Throwing her Christmas presents out on the front street at 4 o'clock on Boxing Day morning and throwing us out to walk the streets and things like that. So as much as I tried to keep her safe and do everything for her, unfortunately I had my second child, Tia, and she was about 6 weeks old when my dad got killed in a RTA. Unfortunately, postnatal depression, sudden death. I had a nervous breakdown and turned to drugs and straight vodka for breakfast. I just couldn't deal with it. Me and my dad, we were chalk and cheese. We were either the best of mates or hated each other. I pretty much hated him until I grew up a bit, and he was the one that was willing to sit down and talk these things through and admit his mistakes where I've never had that conversation with my mum. I've lost my track now.
No, I've got quite a few different thoughts that you've set up with that last one. I think the first one I want to say is that I think, had I been in your shoes, the nervous breakdown, postnatal depression, turning to whatever to be able to cope with it, I would have been probably in an even worse situation. So I'm not even slightly surprised by that. And I'm sure me and everyone else in the comments will send you all their best in being able to take away any shame that might come around that. I know that things like that are really strongly stigmatized as well. I also wanted to say what you were talking about around control is something that I often bring up on these live streams, because it's so key to trauma-informed practice, is understanding that need that people who've been through trauma have for some form of control. It's been taken away completely often, I think, for you in many different situations that you've talked us through. And looking, people who've been traumatized will look themselves to control what they can, and that might be, the things that you were explaining, like the food, or what's the mood.
Back then, it was drugs, and I had a serious issue with food and went down to about 5.5 stone at one point. It got pretty serious. and I was lying to my husband and saying I was meeting my friend in town for lunch, so I didn't need any tea, and became really as devious as I was, as we can get, about trying to get drugs from places, as I was about food.
Mm.
And I think people really need to understand that how much of an addiction food is,
Mm-hmm.
to get comfort from anywhere,
Yeah.
and that these people can come forward as well, and that
Mm-hmm.
their issues that I know less, just because, I mean, it's all relative in my head, that person who eats to comfort themselves should be treated and given the same attention as somebody that's got a serious addiction.
Yeah.
And I still don't think that's in place. Well, it is in place, but I think there's a lot of work to do there yet. I
Yeah,
really
and
do.
that touches on a question I've wanted to ask for a little while, but it was never the top one. And I think it comes around normalizing things, and eating disorders are so key. You know, when I was studying psychology, I think that's a disorder that actually stuck with me the most, because the disorder is often a solution to something, and it's seen as a solution to something. So it's very hard, you know, if you're coming in as a psychologist, as a clinician, to be able to say, you know, we need to fix this, when this is the solution to something entirely different. And
Mm.
they can be so devastating, and, you know, both in overeating and undereating. But if you take things like undereating, you know, once your body's gone into starvation mode, certain parts of your brain are switched off. You know, you can't be reached for relationship building, for therapy, and all kinds of different things. So they should 100% be taken as seriously as other, you know, addictions and other mental health problems.
Yeah, I mean, I do still have, because I am now heavier than I've ever been.
Mm.
And it's probably because I'm healthy. Well, healthy as I can be. But I've still got an issue with it. I still weigh myself every day,
Mm.
and get myself in the right state. My partner's 6 foot and as skinny as they come, and eats for England. I just look at it and oh, sorry, he's just shouted Scotland. He can eat for Scotland.
Important distinction, very important distinction.
Yeah, so that's kind of that hangs around, along with what we spoke about my coping mechanisms, when I'm out shopping, and the counting what I put in my trolley, counting what I
Yeah,
put on
I
a
definitely wanted to
conveyor
ask
belt.
you, could you give a bit more of a detailed answer around some of the positive coping mechanisms that you've been able to develop as you're healing? Because I think they'd be very useful as examples for others.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the best ones that I learned when I was in psychology was to count, and I think it sounds a bit silly to some people, but it really does work if you give it a try. And that's going back a couple of years, I would never have been able to go in one of the big Tesco's. We had a big Tesco extra, biggest mega store, whatever, built. And for a couple of years, I couldn't go in there just because of the size of it. But what I do is now I go in and zone out completely, headphones if needed, and I count everything that I put into my basket, and then I count it as I put it, or scan it through if I'm self-scanning, and it just makes me focus on what I'm doing, shuts out the world, because if anyone stands too close to me, behind me in a queue, I'm too scared to turn around and say, could you just take a step back? You know, it's personal space, and that just helps keep me focused on the task at hand. And I learned that probably when I was around 22, and still continue to use it now. I do an awful lot of meditation, which has helped a lot. Reading up on narcissism and empaths, and how to protect my energy, because I was running around like a headless chicken, doing everything for everyone else, and just basically being taken the mick out of by people that could see that I have a huge issue with saying no. In the past couple of years, reading these books, realizing that these people can spot people like me a mile off and will take you for as much as they can get, and then when it goes wrong, everything turns around and is my fault, and the whole area I live is told that it's me. uh, and it's hard, it's really hard. Yeah, go on, keep me going.
Not at all. No, I think on coping mechanisms, I think that gives some very clear examples. I think some of the strength in the counting one that you gave, which was very, very practical, goes back to what I said at the very beginning of today about grounding yourself to get yourself out of that triggered state. Out of that, the grounding is so essential. So there's lots of tiny exercises you can find on that. I think before our training, we often do one which is kind of like, see if you can notice 5 things you can see, 4 things,
that's another one,
etc. There's lots of little exercises that are very easy to remember, very easy to try, and very easy to find, and they really do work. And what I will say is it takes a little bit of time for them to happen automatically.
Definitely.
For you to access them. So
meditation, especially. A lot of people feel very silly lying down and listening to somebody speaking on the phone, but once you learn to allow yourself to go with it, it actually, if you've had a bad day, then I use it quite a lot in the afternoons when I get that lull. In the day where I'm exhausted, I'll go and lie down, but it's not necessarily sleep. I will do some meditation and bring it back, and that's something that people feel silly about, but it does. I promise it works if you just stick at it. And I think as also, I'm lucky I've got the beach at the end of my street, sorry. So go outside, take your shoes off, put your feet on the ground, feel the ground. For me, I can go and walk on the sands, but even if you just ground yourself by putting your feet on the actual ground and not in shoes or anything, and just take a few minutes to feel the grass, the sand, or whatever under your feet, and it's a distraction technique that works and can bring you back down. The breathing, Wim Hof's app, fantastic app if you want to start learning to breathe. There's a load of other apps that you can breathe with the thing going up and down on the page, all sorts, and I'd recommend anybody to try them. Sleep ones, if you suffer from insomnia, are fantastic.
I'll also say that not everything works for everyone, so don't try something and immediately give up, because as we said, it sometimes takes practice, it takes getting used to it, it's like a muscle. But don't be afraid to adapt it to what works for you. So for example, I've sometimes struggled with meditation, but found that yoga really works for me, because I can't just sit still for that long and be grounded, but I can move really slowly and focus on the movement, and that can ground me more. And those, little examples, I've seen other people, for example, who could meditate but not with their eyes closed because that was triggering to them and they didn't feel safe in that way. There's lots of different things. So don't be afraid if something genuinely doesn't work for you. You are 100% allowed to try something else or edit it or work for it. But there are many coping mechanisms that do make a difference, and that they're much more useful and don't have all the negative side effects than some of the self-medication we were talking about earlier in the live stream today. I think the final thing I'd like to touch on, Andi, as we're really wanting to raise awareness and break those intergenerational cycles, etc., and normalize being able to speak up about these issues, on something that you've touched on a couple of times, which is how sometimes you're only able to realize what's happening when you have the comparison. I think you mentioned this both in terms of some of the violent relationships you've been in, as in comparison to some of the previous trauma you'd experienced, it wasn't as bad, but also during childhood of maybe having seen different things happen to other people and not immediately identifying what you'd been through as being a trauma. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on what happens when someone's own trauma is normalized to them, so they don't realize some of the hell that they have been through or are going through.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, and I'm probably victim to it as well, who think that they can just lock it in a box and put it away. My sister did this when Dad died. I had a breakdown, and she just worked afternoon all day and then nighttime for about 5 years till it hit her. It's not great to keep it locked away, it really isn't. And honestly, having worked in mental health right through my life, there's no judgment for anyone. Reach out to me, reach out to anyone in the groups that we're in. There are people
again there.
Yeah, there are people that can that will help you and won't judge you. You know, a lot of us are recovered addicts, you know, including myself, but that's another hour's chat. Yeah, but you do need to reach out and learn these things. Look for maybe groups in your area, but I know a lot of people don't like that. I mean, I have a problem getting myself over the front doorstep. Once I'm out, I'm all right. If I'm in my car, that's my safe place, my bubble. And a lot of people do that, but I am also very bad for hiding in my bedroom, and this needs to stop. Unfortunately, mental health services are pushed to the limit. It's not their fault, it's funding. I know I've been there. If you have a bad experience with one mental health service, please don't give up.
Yeah.
Not everybody is suited to everybody. It's like the drug and alcohol addictions as well. AA, NA works for some people, it doesn't work for others. So if you go along and have a chat with somebody and you don't feel that you can relax and actually tell them those deep thoughts and feelings that obviously we can't talk about because it's too triggering for people, but people will understand. You need to find somebody that you can have that relationship with.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will have a list on the Wave Trust. I'll put one up on the Cumbria 7030 campaign of places that you can reach out to. I mean, we have a fantastic service, Women's Community Matters, and men's groups and things like that. And that's another thing, recognising men also suffer this domestic violence. And, you know, obviously everybody is seeing the recent trial going on. You know, it happens both ways. And people need to start realising that. And it's great the amount of men that are joining the men's groups and beginning to talk about these things. You don't have to put it in them boxes. You talk about it, you get it out, and then you close the box. If you close the box without dealing with it, it's going to come and bite you on the bum, unfortunately. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. But one day it's going to come out. If I get stressed now, I still get nightmares about the rapes and, you know, some of the really awful things. I mean, I wasn't allowed to make a noise or anything, so they'd take great pleasure in cutting me and seeing if they could make me make a noise. So I've got quite a high pain threshold and things like that. And see how I can say that now is because it's gone. So you get it out and it's almost, you become detached to it. So it's this story I've got feels like it could have happened to somebody else now. And yeah, we need to get that out there, as well as getting into schools and things, and keeping children informed, that of getting teachers all ACE trained, and letting children know that they have safe spaces to speak as well. The earlier we get in there and interventions put in to work with families, the sooner the better.
The earlier the better, during pregnancy, during the first few years of life, during primary school, get that in, absolutely. And I think, Angie, I'm just going to echo what you were saying about the not giving up hope when you have a negative experience, because I think it's such an important thing to end on. And with a psychology background myself, sort of things I'm particularly passionate about. First and foremost, in terms of waiting lists and budget issues and the capacity issues, it is something that we are actively working to improve, to fix through 70/30. So if it's something you're also passionate about, please do join us. We are shifting the attention towards making sure that people have the support they need when they need it. And I'll also say the understanding of most types of help, particularly when it's mental health support, is that it's not something that is done to you. It is something that is done with you through a relationship. They bring a type of expertise and you bring your life and what has gone on. So if for whatever reason there is a mismatch with one person, don't give up. That's not a sign. And I know how hard it is to reach out and ask for help. So I'm not at all minimizing that and how difficult it is.
No, it is very, very.
There is support out there. And yeah, Andy, I'll let you come in on that one.
Yeah, the anxiety and what have you that goes along with that. My late husband, well, there were 7 at his inquest. There was 7 misconduct by the crisis team, and most of them were down to lack of communication, and them seeing him as a revolving door kind of patient. So he'll be all right, and he went up there knocking on the door begging, and was never seen again. So if you don't feel comfortable with your crisis team or anything like that, you can go to PALS. I don't know whether PALS is it countrywide.
I would.
They work in hospitals too. If you've had a bad experience, you can talk to them, and they're really good about sorting it out. But please speak up, and if you can't speak up, reach out to one of us for some advice, because your mental health is your life, and you deserve to live. If you've suffered the traumas that, we've barely touched upon mine today, if you can talk to them and reach out to one of us, if you don't like the mental health team, there's many different options.
Yeah, and I also speak to that. If all else fails, there are peer support groups to fall back on, especially now that we are in an online world in which it doesn't have to be in person, in which there aren't physical limits to the number of people. Hearts of ACE is a wonderful example, but they're not the only one. Many of our ambassadors also have some of their own peer support groups. But if nothing else, that is someone who will listen, someone who will believe you, someone you can build a relationship with, someone who can give you enough strength to make the effort to reach out again. So do please know that you're worth that effort, and hopefully you can start your own journey towards healing. And I think that's probably the best note to end it on, Andy, unless you have any kind of last comments, last messages you want to give to people.
No, I think that's it until I go on to bereavement and my trying to get clean and seeing life and having to face it for real life, but that'll be for another day.
Absolutely. And we will have many live streams to come on all kinds of topics, Andy, so it would be wonderful to have you on again at some point, if that's something you want. I realise that I have not grabbed my usual live stream piece of paper to hand. Just 2 seconds.
Okay.
Just want to say to everyone, if you tune in on, the 14th of June, we'll be having our next live stream with the Hearts of Ace people, and we'll be focusing specifically on emotional neglect if you want to join us. So you can stick that in your diaries, and it'll all be out on our Facebook page as usual. But
well, I can relate to that with my childhood.
You're welcome to come on, Andy.
I'll
if you
be
want to and have a chat, it would be wonderful to include you in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I will say you're getting some wonderful comments again in the wishing you well, Andy, and I will say the absolute same thing. It's been a pleasure being able to have this conversation with you and to be able to explore things in a safe space. And to anyone listening, please do know that things can get better, that you can build resilience later on, and there are many, many places that you can turn to for help. So please don't give up.
No, just reach out.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.